In this demonstration, I'll show you how to work with datasets. Now there's different kinds of datasets. There are shared datasets and embedded datasets. I'll start by importing an existing dataset into my project by right-clicking the project, selecting the Add command, and then Existing Item. Then I can navigate to somewhere on my file system where I have stored an RSD file, and then click Add. That adds the file to the Shared Datasets folder. Of course, I can create my own shared dataset by selecting the Shared Datasets folder and selecting the command Add New Dataset. When I double-click the RSD file, I get the same Shared Datasets properties that I get if I were to add my own dataset. The dataset has a name, using the same rules that we have for naming data sources, where I cannot have any embedded spaces and the name needs to start with a letter. I also need to specify a data source, and in the case of shared data sets, the data source must be a shared data source. Then I have a query specified. I can type in the query here, or I can click the Query Designer button to get the graphical or the generic query designer, or I can import a query from another report or a saved query file. Now this query returns two columns, calendar year and sales amount, and those have been added as fields to the fields collection for this dataset. Now I'm going to cancel here and show you how to create an embedded dataset. So in my workspace, I currently have open the Report1 RDL file, and in the Report Data pane, I'm going to right-click the Datasets folder and select Add Dataset. Here it asks me for the dataset name, and it shows me any shared datasets that are already in the project. Now it assumes that I want to create a shared dataset. If I want to create an embedded dataset, I need to change the option here, which I'll do now. I'll give it a name, sales, and then I need to select a data source, or I can create a data source if I don't have one yet in this particular report. The list that I see here will show me the data source that I've defined in the report. Those could be either shared data sources or embedded data sources. After making the data source selection, I then need to specify the type of query, which in this case will be text, and then provide the query. I'll click the Query Designer. Now because I'm using the SQL Server data source, the Graphical Query Designer displays. I can add tables by clicking the last button on the toolbar here, and then I can work with columns or type the SQL statement directly here. Alternatively, I can click the Edit as Text button to toggle to the generic Query Designer and then type in my query directly here. Either way, both designers have a Run button that lets me execute the query and then see the results in the bottom portion of the designer. If I have a query that's already available in another file, I can import it by navigating to the folder that contains the file and then select either the SQL script or an RDL file. I'll use the sales script that's here. And that imports into the Query Designer. And this might be easier to read if we switch over to the Edit as Text. We can see that this select statement retrieves the sales territory group, the calendar year, and the sales amount based on an aggregation, as well as the aggregation of the order quantity from the factory seller sales table, which is in turn joined to several dimension tables. I'll click the Run button here and verify that the query executes properly, and then I can also see the columns that get returned. These are the columns that become fields in my data set. When I click OK, notice that nothing has been added to my report data pane yet, but when I click OK a second time, now my datasets folder contains the dataset reference as well as the individual fields listed here. At this point, the dataset's embedded. If I decide later that I want to turn it into a shared dataset, all I need to do is to right-click on the dataset in the Report Data pane and then use the command Convert to Shared Dataset. Notice the icon that appears here, and this indicates that we now have a shared dataset. Also, the dataset's been added to the project in the Shared Datasets folder in my Solution Explorer.